Hey everybody, it's great to see so many of you chiming in here in the chat, and looking forward to. Oh yeah, it's hard to keep up with. Great crowd here on the chat. Love to see where folks are calling in from around the world, and what you're grateful for. And I'm going to disappear into the background here. I'm just sort of managing the technical side of things, and I'm going to pass it over to John to get us started into the webinar proper. Thanks everybody.
Hey, that was the voice, the mysterious voice of H. Shields, Matt Goff from Sitka, Alaska. He's been a really important helper on the technical side here and has allowed this to be possible. As always, thank you, Matt. And thank you. Gosh, we've had 700 people register for this webinar. I'm sure you won't all show up now, but thank you for tuning in later if you're watching this after the live event. But we're really thankful for all the people who are showing up and saying hello right now. In the chat, and from all over the world. Fantastic to have you here. And so what I might do is call on you, Matt, again. And this is my friend Deborah Benham. Say hello, Deborah.
Hello, everyone. It's a delight to be here. Very excited.
And your background is much more inspiring than mine, Deborah. I'm leaning against a wall in my children's room, and but just happy to have a wall to lean against, right, with light and working computer and all that. Where are you calling in from today?
I am calling in from Forres, which is a town in North Scotland near the Findhorn Eco Village. Some of you may have heard of that. Some of you may even be in the area. And it's evening here, a lovely spring evening. I'm looking out over clouds with the sun going down and birds wheeling around. It's very nice.
Well, in our meeting before this, you told me what you were thankful for. Would you like to just offer people some gratitude? I loved your gratitude this morning.
Sure. I was visiting with a friend last night who has a 7-day-old baby. So I was feeling super grateful for new life and for babies of all sorts, the lambs and the calves that are around in the fields right now, and for my friend's new baby, and just for the new life every day.
Thank you. I'm going to second you on that. And today I'm making this webinar possible from Soquel, California, which is S-O-Q-U-E-L, not SoCal, which a lot of people immediately hear me say, but must be my accent. Anyway, we're here nestled in the foothills of the Santa Cruz Mountains and along a beautiful creek, and also grateful for, we have some nice gentle spring rains. If anyone's been tuning in to headlines of global weather, you've probably heard the Santa Cruz Mountains having a lot of problems from heavy rains this winter. Much more than we normally get. And of course, as you also know, California has been in a drought. And so we're all grateful for the rain. And I'm really grateful for the gentle rains that have fallen in the last 12 hours that are, nourishing all the new life. There's flowers everywhere. It's just incredible this spring. There's so many forget-me-nots blooming on the ground, and a whole bunch of the California natives and calla lilies popping up everywhere, and tree blossoms, and birds building nests, and bird song. And I'm sure those of you who are in the Northern Hemisphere are enjoying this spring, as I keep hearing in all the conference calls that I'm on. Everyone's just given great gratitude for the return of spring. And also, I'm sure for those of you who in the Southern Hemisphere, you're really thankful for the gifts of the fall. But I'm just really grateful to all of you for taking time out of your day to be with us live now, from wherever you're calling in from, or those of you who are listening later. Thank you again for sitting with Deborah and I for an hour and hearing some stories, and hopefully we'll be able to offer you some gifts as well, for taking time to hear about what we do with Village Builders, something that I'm particularly excited about. And I think I should probably start there. I'm going to call on Matt in a little while to see if any questions pop up when I pause after sharing some information, because I can't both see the screen and the chat at the same time here. So Matt's been kind enough to help in that area. So again, thank you so much, all of you, for all your good input and the sidebar. Matt was giving me some of that early before we started, and where you're calling in from. So here's where I'm going to start. First of all, we keep throwing around this word Village Builders, but I'd like to start it with a very personal story, which maybe some of you have already heard me share. But it's hard to be on the forming edge of something, and as they say in the permaculture movement, we're on the cutting edge of a 10,000-year-old technology. because permaculture draws its wisdom from indigenous culture. And so it's really ancient wisdom being recast in new ways. And yet it's very hard to explain that to people in terms that they understand. And you might think of village building as a form of social permaculture, which also draws its lineage from ancient roots. And you'll hear a little story here in a minute that will help you understand, where village building comes from. But in the meantime, let me just say this. I've been a adopter of an experimental pattern of reintroducing, let's just call it social technology, from ancient roots back into modern settings to see the impact it would have specifically on nature connection. That was my original interest. I kind of felt, my simple thesis was, and by the way, it's proven to be true after 30 plus years of doing this. It's proving itself true over and over and over again. So there's a positive pattern that I'm aware of that I want to influence, and that's ultimately what we're here to talk about. But I did a bunch of research between 79 and 83 based on my mentoring in a traditional tracking lineage, because I was curious, what do the cultures who build amazing trackers all have in common? And that was my main question, and the way I can phrase it in modern terminology, thanks to Richard Louv and all the researchers on nature connection, is why are some social groups so incredibly connected to nature and all their children are incredibly connected to nature and others aren't? And the others that aren't connected are really overwhelming the planet right now. The vast majority of the social systems on our planet are practicing forms of disconnection as a social norm that's creating and exacerbating a lot of problems, both sociologically, environmentally, spiritually, you name it. And so I put together this bundle of research, and in 1983, I was joined by an elder named Yngwie, otherwise known as Norman Powell, whose parents were some of the earliest settlers in Kenya. And so at the age of 6 years old, he moved from South Africa, where he was born in 1914, and he settled in Kenya with his family in 1920. But his only playmates, because there were no other people from the British colonies around for 30 miles, and in those days, there was no roads, there was no way to get around. His only playmates were the Akamba people, who were just living their life. He was there at the moment when the hunter-gatherer nomads were still active, the Bushmen, the Akamba, and he grew up with them in this amazing boyhood that, he said at the end of his days, he passed away in 2005. He said, if there was I would never change a single thing about my boyhood if I could live my life again, because he grew up in a holistic, powerful village setting. He grew up speaking more Kikamba than he did English. He ended up getting sent to the Prince of Wales School for Gentlemen when his father's friends said, hey, your son's going native. And then he learned, as he always said right up to the end of his days, we have to learn to live fully in two worlds, and in essence, village building is a set of design principles that helps us to the attempt to live fully in two worlds, because as Deborah will probably concur, village building is at best challenging. Even when it's working well, it's still a problem, because we're living in two worlds, literally, a very deeply connected, nature-connected world, and a modern world that's very disconnected. And sometimes those two sides don't meet. There's a great, communication challenge across that bridge. And so some of the design principles that we build into village building is, how to negotiate, how to navigate that, and how to learn communication strategies and such to make you more effective, essentially, as a facilitator of positive influence. But ultimately, my story, which you'll hear more about Yngwie in a minute, but what drives this to focus on village building at 8 Shields now is something very personal to me, where having worked, directly with, 50 or so communities globally, helping them learn village building over the last, 22 years, I got to see that this pattern actually worked. It didn't take me to wield it. Other people were wielding the various design elements and getting the same results, which meant that, it wasn't about some unique savant gift that I had, because God knows I don't have enough gifts to really be everything. And probably like many of us, we all feel that way. There's only certain things we're good at, and other things we have to leave to others. I'm more of a researcher, like a collector of design elements and an engineer of systems. And I don't always get it right. And my life has been up and down as a result. But the thing that really, makes me feel really hopeful is that these 50 or so direct community trainings that I did resulted in, somewhere around 500 projects out there in the world based on village building. And in all those projects, I get to meet the children who grew up around this and the adults who have found connection through it. And, the children come up to me and they hug me, and I get tears in my eyes every time because, they're thanking me for something in their gut level that they know that I'm carrying, that I brought to their families and communities, and they don't even know the nuances. They just know, that they wanted to thank me. And I see the light is on in their eyes. I see that they have all the attributes of connection. They're happy, they're vital, they're really good listeners, they have empathy, they want to be helpful, they're really, really in love with life itself. They have this love and compassion and forgiving spirit and heart. And they have the quiet mind, which is access to their own creative genius. They're powerful people. And my colleague, Mark Morey, counted with 75 projects that he researched, over 55,000 people who have been positively influenced in this direction. And we were tracking the young people on the phone recently, where he spoke to the fact that there's, more than 10,000 of these children who are now adults in their 20s and 30s who are just out there totally doing awesome things, So, and that's a tiny fraction of our global population, but these, 25,000 people, if we brought them all together, 55,000 people, and we all got together and we all looked at each other in the eyes, we would feel really hopeful about the world, So what I'm saying is that this old technology really works. It's largely lost on modern situations, and it's being incorporated in all levels of society now with positive outcomes every time it's implemented in a way that makes sense in that context, So ultimately, it's up to you to figure out how it works in the context that you come from. And that's why I'm so thankful that Deborah has joined me here today, because Deborah is a person who was one of the early adopters of Village Builders, and she really did some amazing stuff with it and learned a lot of lessons. She's going to tell her story in a minute. But, back to my personal story, the reason why I'm here is because, I had this very clear vision recently in a gratitude ceremony that one of the community members was offering, where I saw the hands of the future generations reaching up from the soil. And they were all the colors of the races of people around the world, all intermingled like grass growing in the field. And I could tell they were little children's hands. And they were coming up above the ground. And it brought to mind something that Jake Swamp, one of my late uncles and dear friends and contributors to 8 Shields, said, was that when we walk on the earth, we walk gently because we're walking on the faces of the children who have not yet risen from the earth. So these are the future generations. And I knew that these hands represented that. I knew it immediately when I saw them. And I knew that they were asking for help because they were reaching help, we're drowning kind of feeling. And they were going down for the last time. And I know that they were saying, this works. Now get it out to as many people as possible because we need it. We need you to help us. And I was like, man, how can we scale this? How can we make this more effective? How can we reach more people with this? And ultimately, as a team at 8 Shields, village building became the answer to that question. How do we get this recipe out to as many as possible who are at least willing to do their best to make a positive difference in whatever way they can? And everybody who has signed into Village Builders over the last several years, they're all people who are trying to make a difference in their communities, and they all are already making a difference in their communities. And we just really, truly want to help them be more effective if we can help at all. And that is the spirit of village building. So that is what brings us to this call, to this webinar. And ultimately, the story is that when I started my project in 1983, Yngwie joined me in 1983. And here was a man who was now an elder who had grown up in a village, adopted by the ceremonial leader of the village. So he was taught village building from an early age. At 15, he had a powerful vision, and he was recognized as someone who could be trained in this essence of village building. And what I didn't know at the age of 23 was that he was doing it right in front of me without me noticing. It was hidden in plain view. But in 1995, when we were forced to move Wilderness Awareness School to Washington State, because it was really dying in New Jersey, but really thriving in Washington and California, we knew we had to make a decision to go where the energy was. But Yngwie was too elderly to travel, and his wife was still working, and they elected to stay behind, and I took it by myself over there. And after 12 years of him doing village building, hidden in plain view, with this amazing unconscious competence, just building village continuously. When I left, he had already had 265 adopted grandchildren who were pen pals, you know, so he had all these families that looked to him as the grandfather, and we consider him the grandfather of the Eight Shields movement. He inspired many. If you want to know more about Yngwie, there's a really little book about him called Yngwie, I-N-G-W-E, that you could find on the Eight Shields products list. And we call it the Yngwie Cliff Notes because it's amazingly short for such a rich life. We wished he left 2,000 pages. But anyway, you'll get a sense of who he is and why he's important. But really, ultimately, what it points to is through Yngwie to the elders of both the Akamba and the Bushmen who taught him village building. And I had researched village building before I had a name for it. And he and I had full agreement on why this pattern was important. It wasn't just about educational methods of teaching people about nature. It was about being effective at connecting them to nature, to one another, and to themselves. And ultimately, that is what the entire Eight Shields movement is working on, using the village building pattern to some degree. So when I moved to Washington in 1995, I innocently thought that it would be easy to jumpstart this whole thing all over again, not realizing that why it worked so well in New Jersey was because there was a really powerfully built village. Yeah, it was organically built and it was kind of invisible and everywhere, but still, you know, it was there. And I had all these elders and aunties and uncles to lean on, and the children had aunties and uncles to lean on, and we had each other to talk to and to share our deepest stories with. When I got to Washington, there was just no awareness of this. And even though everyone body nodded and said, yeah, we want this, when it came down to it, every time we went to run a youth program with the newly trained adults there, it fell flat. And everyone defaulted to the patterning that they had grown up with, you know, which was more based on a schooling model as opposed to a connection model. And I didn't know what was going wrong, you know. And I'll share a little bit, you know, at the end here, you know, what are some of the tools that Yngwie was using that were so effective, that are still very effective. And we will happily share a PDF of these things, Supportive Community Structures PDF, which will give you you know, a quick start guide to village building, you know, in a very basic way. Yeah, we'll send that out to you when we send out the link to the webinar. So stand by for that. But in the meantime, just know that, you know, village building is a set of design principles that increases what we call connection density. And you know, what you would feel in a connection dense environment would be, you would feel happy, you would feel safe, you would allow yourself to relax, your empathy would turn back on, you would feel loved and seen and invited and part of, supported. And that allows your nervous system to relax, and that allows connection to flow, right? So anytime you've been with really dear friends, family that you love and trust, you have felt connection density to a certain degree. And anytime you've got into an environment where connection was not part of the structure, and maybe it was just kind of a model where an expert was imparting information to you, you might have found it a little bit flat. You know, there was no connection, there was no greeting, you know, there was not a feeling of safety, you didn't feel connected, you kind of kept yourself busy. And you know, so much of modern patterning is like that. You know, it's anti-connective. And that has to do with a long history, a long cultural history of disconnection in the modern times. Almost every society has been deeply traumatized at certain points in their lineage where they lost connection practices, they lost their culture. And then a couple generations later, they kind of have amnesia, and then they just get along with the program and just become good participants in the consumption-based society, which is, you know, part of the problem. You know, ultimately, you know, I discerned and reverse engineered over the last 5 years. You know, what is the recipe that really made these other communities jump off and work well? What were the recipes that really helped Wilderness Awareness School to get on its feet and to get really going? What was the village building that I used and modeled in Washington that is still effective today, affecting tens of thousands of people in the greater Seattle area? Wilderness Awareness School is the oldest and biggest project in the Eight Shields movement, and it's doing fantastic, offering programs for all ages and stages of life. And it has a very powerful village network built around it that covers many counties and, again, you know, tens of thousands of people. So, but that same recipe is what is Village Builders, you know, and there's many layers to village building because connection density requires a layered strategy. You know, we're basically looking at expert to participant kind of thing. It's a collapsed structure. But if you simply lift the expert to a different position and put a third layer in between, which focuses on welcoming and connecting people, then the participants go to another level, and the expert feels like they can spread their wings and fly because suddenly they feel safe and seen and held in a really good way. So, even with just a 3-layered model, village building can make a huge difference and increase that connection density quotient. Yesterday, I was resting and returning from Africa, where I spent some quality time with some San Bushmen, who are the masters of connection as far as I'm concerned. In all my research, they apply more connection modeling than any other society that I have fully dug into, and they're still practicing them today in the community where I visit. And I was in a very connection dense environment. If a powerful connection dense environment is 3 layers, they're working with what I would call a full 8-layered model, and it's super potent, and it makes me feel immediately at home and safe and relaxed and loved and held and all the things I just said to you. And being with those people, and then coming back to modern times, even to friends, I can feel the connection environment flattening. And it's not because I don't love the people and that they're not good people. It's because we're not practicing connection modeling anymore. So ultimately, we want to give you everything that we can to help you understand how to build a full-fledged model. And some organizations, like up in Salt Spring Island, they're now moving towards a full 8-layered model, with Jean-Claude and Ingrid Bauer doing some amazing work there. The Wilderness Awareness School is working with a really huge, thick model here in California. There's multiple organizations doing the same all over the European world, and down in Australasia things are developing. In South Africa things are starting to get going a little bit, and all over North America, and even the Hawaiian Islands, New Zealand, it's starting to pick up. There's a crew in Israel that's starting to get going with this. We really, really want to support you to know how to take this long design process to your community, to be an effective stakeholder in positive change towards connection. And ultimately, that's what we're here for. So that was a long introduction. Deborah's been very patient. Thank you for continuing to smile, Deborah. I'd like Deborah to introduce yourself. Please tell people a little bit about your background, and maybe how you came to be one of the co-leads for village building. Thanks for being here.
Sure, thank you, John. Okay, so my background, I was a wildlife biologist. So I was out, luckily, very fortunately, studying in California back in the early 2000s, studying sea otters. And I became very interested in people's connection to nature and how that connection works, and why we want to be so close to wildlife, and also the damage that can cause. So I guess I was studying ecotourism and people behavior as well as animal behavior, and how we actually talk to people about their interactions with wildlife. So I was very much an academic, but I was becoming more and more of a social scientist and trying to understand people's behavior and attitude towards nature. And then I came to Scotland, and I was doing similar work with dolphins and the dolphin watching industry in Scotland. And again, I was fascinated by people and how nature affects us, and these kind of transformative experiences that people have in nature, when, especially with charismatic species or environments they haven't spent much time in. And I started my own company doing nature connection holidays, and taking people out, families, children and adults of all ages, and just really loving also that family dynamic of being with families in nature, and seeing children and adults that lived in cities just feeling so proud of themselves for walking along a riverbank, for making a fire, for all this kind of stuff. So I was doing that, and during that time I moved to a beautiful community in Scotland and was running the programs from there. It's a big Victorian house with usually a team of about 20 people living and working there as staff and volunteers, doing sustainable living, retreats and education. And there was a lot of really great practices already in that team, but it was a newly formed team after a difficult period. And I came into the team, and we looked at what had been working and not working in the past, with the intention to try and build a healthier community. And that same year was my introduction to Art of Mentoring. And Art of Mentoring, I was very fortunate because it happened half a mile up the road from the community I was living in, and I had the opportunity to fully participate in that Art of Mentoring. And I, like many of you have probably experienced, it was a sense of, the word I had at the end of the week was just complete reassurance. Everything I'd been trying to learn, trying to understand, trying to create a model in my own mind suddenly had a framework that everything fit into, and a lot more. And I remember standing in that circle of 200 people at the end, And funnily enough, the feeling I had in that moment was, oh, I can have children now because there's this community around the world. There's people doing this work to hold that if I decide to become a mother. And I'd never felt that before. So that was a very interesting thing to notice standing in that community of people after that week. Yeah, so after that, there was a very strong regional group in Scotland for years after that. And many of those people are doing incredible projects in the area now, right from the Nature Connection to community building to gender work to all kinds of working with elders. And I went on to bring as much as I could of 8 Shields as I understood it at that stage into my work with the family holidays. And also I was becoming more and more involved in the management team in the community I was living in. So I was bringing it in there. At first, I tried to bring it in a really big, obvious, hey, here's a great, big, sexy, exciting model. And people kind of went, what's all that? And that didn't really work. So that was an interesting moment. And then after that, I brought in tiny little elements. One of the most powerful things we brought in really early was just having a round of gratitude in the mornings. We were having these check-ins that used to depress everyone. We'd all get really bogged down in how bad we were feeling or how stressed or this bad dream we had the night before. And we brought in a ground of gratitude instead, and everything kind of started lighting up, and that's still happening to this day. So that's part of it. I've been using it ever since in my work. I now use it in consultancy with other communities and organizations. Been fortunate enough to be teaching with John recently and bringing more and more of it to the UK. And now we have a really great UK team working to create a network, bring more art of mentorings here, other trainings, and also really looking at how can we start village building just across the UK in every village, in every region, community, neighbourhoods. And I'm pretty sure some of you out there were on the course that John and I were teaching on earlier because you've been emailing me, so hi everyone. I'm really excited to see some of you in the next few weeks.
Yay.
So that's, oh God, concertinaed, but I can talk about any part of that more if John thinks that's useful.
Well, the thing I failed to mention was that the training model that we created in 1995 in Washington to train the adult community was called the Art of Mentoring, and that you had referred to the Art of Mentoring. Maybe people don't really know that the Art of Mentoring is kind of like the demonstration model of connection modeling. By paid staff and volunteers coming together and creating this amazing village building moment for 7 days, and then awakening everyone's sense on a deep, as you said, deep personal spiritual level, like, wow, yeah, everything's going to work. And that's what village feels like when it's really working. So Art of Mentoring is kind of like I would call it an exhibit, really, right? It's like a community gets together and they bring in people from all different programs and elders and children and families, and we create a village for a week, and we apply, village building modeling live together for 7 days. And it starts out feeling a bit like a program and a simulation. Within a couple of days, it just fully ignites into this whole other dynamic, and everyone leaves there, especially children, saying, we can't leave, we need this in our lives every day, which is part of the design. We want people to feel that and realize what's missing by experiencing what's possible. So yeah, that would be helpful for people to know. And Deborah, your story was exactly witnessing exactly the kind of stuff that people come away with from that experience. The other thing that would be helpful probably is what was your background with me and village building? That would probably be helpful for people too.
How much of the magical synchronicity do you want me to go into, John? So I was very fortunate. I was very fortunate that John and Anna Bradenbach, who does the interspecies communication, were coming to teach at Fintor near me. And I'd done a bunch of programs with both of them previous to that, so I was able to volunteer on that program to support them. And during a tea break, John and I were having a very excited conversation about this new program that was launching Village Builders. And I said, oh, I'm the right kind of person to be on that program. I'm just doing this, and this. And John said, that's exactly right. This is going to be so helpful and so interesting for you. You should come on it. And so I did. I joined. I believe it was the first year that it was running, and I'm still on it. It doesn't seem to finish.
It never ends.
Yeah, so I joined as an individual at that time, and it was such a huge eye-opening experience. It's still happening now, but for that first 6 months when I was on the calls every month and having calls with the other staff within 8 Shields and with John and so on, I was able to take it and apply it to the community I was living in. So take the different parts and try it out. And also still using it in our regional gatherings. And I mean, it was such a rich set of materials that I still feel that I've only, you know, explored them 30% as much as I could. There's still more that I'm unpacking and bringing into new conversations, new organizations I'm working with. So that was the first year, was kind of doing it on my own and just looking at what bits can I bring to the places I'm already working. And that was super powerful already. Then as we were starting to gather in the UK, some of you might even be here from the UK gang. We were starting to gather in what we were calling Heartwood meetings to look at what can we bring to the UK as a whole, you know, big area. What can we bring another art of mentoring? There'd been a bit of a dip, a couple of years without doing an art of mentoring, the big camp that John was just talking about. What can we bring to our regions? How can we reinvigorate and start new regions? And that was lovely, because then we basically formed a triad that then went into the second round of village building. And I think there were two tracks running. There was the personal development track that came from being on Village Builders, and then the incredible kind of community or professional or whatever you want to call it, the kind of us track that was developing. So 8 Shields in the UK just mushroomed, you know. Suddenly there were so many of us, we were talking, we were planning, looking at how much more we could bring to the UK, what we could do in our regions. And at the same time, I was having all these personal transformations as I applied this material in my life and in my community and in my work day to day. So that's kind of been the journey so far, but I'm still completely on it. So it just keeps getting more and more interesting.
Yeah, it's like Deborah and I were just teaching at EF Schumacher just recently. We were teaching Introduction to Village Building, right? And
Yes.
and it was great teaching with you. And what a wonderful acorn we had too, a great team working with us to create that connection layer. And boy, we really got connected with folks from all over the world that week, and it was so fun making new friends and meeting new stakeholders. But we started joking, there's a song, you know, this is the song that never ends, right? And we were laughing that Village Building, this is the program that never ends, you know.
Yeah.
And quite literally, you know, village building it's kind of like, you know, if you know permaculture and you go into the permaculture design manual, there's so much there and it's so overwhelming. It's like, okay, this will never end, right? It has that kind of feeling to it because there's so many systems that need to be restored on so many levels in social permaculture, as well as, you know, the biophysical realm of environmental positive change. So yeah, I mean, if you you express that very well. And I think, you know, the full 8 shields by 8 rings by 8 strands model, which we call the Project 512, is sort of the full recipe card index, you know, with thousands of recipe cards for people to take and apply in their own neighborhood. Even in Yngwe's lifetime, even with a really powerful cultural elder in the village, you know, the old grandmother who knows how to do this, or the old grandfather knows how to do this, none of them need to know all 512 elements. I mean, because it used to be that everybody sort of had specialties and things that attracted them and things that they were good at. So, you know, even if we lay out the fullness of the 512 map of all the things that could possibly influence village, from preconception of a human life through birth all the way to the, you know, 100-year passing mark and into ancestry, you know, because that's what the village building map is covering. It's like looking at all ages and stages of life, even before conception and post-death, because culture deals with that too. You know, it wasn't never anyone's job to do that, right? And that brings up one of the big questions that Garrett at 8 Shields has been really fielding a lot. Because, you know, the cost of village builders is high if you're coming in by yourself. And we're like, well, come in with 2 other people, because you don't want to do this alone anyway. No one has ever had to do this alone in history. It's not meant for an individual to be like the savior of the village. It's just not sustainable or smart. You know, it's very important to have you know, we say a triad because the tripod is a very stable structure. And in the last, you know, 20 years of village building consulting, we've seen that where there's at least 3 people holding the village building work, it's stable. You know, 2 people tend to have a dynamic. 1 person alone really is you know, definitely struggling. And, you know, the most effective groups are like the UK Bountiful Triad, which has, you know, how many, Deborah, in your quote unquote triad? It's like more than a dozen.
I think we've had 8 or 9 at times, and then, you know, 4 or 5 at other times, but it goes up to 8 or 9 on some calls.
Right. So, I mean, this is the smartest approach, a council approach, and if there's a group of people who consider themselves stakeholders in a region, for them to share the cost of village building, consulting, and training is wise, because then, the per person cost is much lower. But as many people have said to me, that once village building is implemented in a community, it literally saves lives. And, the price of village building is actually very cheap compared to the loss of life. The positive changes that people have experienced through this modeling are so immeasurable in terms of value. Because really, what is the value of having a healthy earth, a healthy community, healthy family, healthy children that want to live their life in a positive, constructive way? So ultimately, if we apply the designs well, we see positive change. And as Deborah said, she just took one element from the 512 map, the starting meetings with gratitude, and it had a huge impact. And as our friend Lisa Donahue in Toronto, who's one of the elders in the 8 Shields Network, she says, any one of these 512 elements can change lives, can literally transform lives. Imagine what happens if you even manage to get a social grouping of people to share 20 or 30 of them. And that's ultimately, and as you were saying, 20 to 30%, that's a lot, really, of cultural elements applied if you're doing 30% of the 512 map, and that can make a huge impact on connection outcome. So, and Deborah also, she spoke, because I remember having lots of great conversations with Deborah during her early village building days. And as she said, she was very fired up and rushing in and saying, "This is what we're going to do now. Here's this great new model." And I said to her, and as I'll say to you, it's not important that you brand the 8 Shields model. You don't have to convince people that there's this great thing and it's the best thing since sliced bread, and you have to try it, because it usually doesn't work well when you do that. But instead, to find opportunities and ways to implement, in a way that works, is comfortable, because ultimately you have to learn good mentoring skills. You have to learn to meet people where they're at, give them what they need in that moment, and take them a little bit further across the bridge with simple things that work right at the get-go, that result in positive change, so people can feel the change. Yeah. And yeah, Deborah, do you have any comments about that? Remember I told you about your wizard's cave. You remember that?
Yes. This kind of feels like a wizard's cave with all these amazing books in it.
Mm-hmm.
Just as you were talking, I was remembering a very interesting conversation I had with a friend and colleague and a sort of local mover and shaker a couple of days ago in a cafe here. I don't know if he's on the webinar. He might even be on the webinar if you are. Hi, Fabio. And we were talking about if we were going to bring this kind of set of design principles to this region in a wider way, actually through the council or through the schools or through the community organizations, the social organizations. What would that look like? How would that work? And it was very interesting, because we actually started exploring, well, of course, the first thing we do is we go to all those different community groups and the people that are doing that work, and we say, what are the needs? What's already happening? What's happening with kids programs? What's happening with elders programs? What's not happening? Where are the pain points? What do you wish there was more of in your village, your town, your area? What do you wish your kids had access to? So I was saying, it's not that I would come in or anyone would come in and kind of give a presentation or a seminar about village building or about 8 Shields. We'd just be having a chat and a discussion with people, saying, what is it you want to bring to this community, so it felt richer and more supportive and more beautiful, and everyone felt better and more alive and more connected. And once we had that conversation, it was like, oh, right, yeah, so we can see that we'd work with them and they'd be interested in this, and it would start to weave together. So that's how, so that was just a conversation I just had 2 days ago about how a whole region might start. Who would you even go to start those conversations about what could happen in a region or a neighborhood? And of course, it can be applied at every level. I mean, I use it in my personal relationship with my fiance. That's the kind of smallest unit of village building, right, is with our partners and our families.
That's right.
And it helps us so much. And then, in the organizations and businesses that I've worked with or run, and then how do we bring it to our town, our region, is that kind of really big sacred question that I have at the moment. So just wanted to say a little bit about those different scales, I guess, and the conversations of how would I even start.
That's great. I really appreciate that perspective. I saw a question bounce through from Trudy just now, and she wanted to know if the whole 512 project map will be available through the village building thing. Trudy, the answer to that is that we are working, there's a team of us working kind of furiously in a research and development sort of capacity to actually get the whole 512 map out there. We're three quarters of the way through the first 64 of 512 now, and by July we should have the first 64 done. And we're hoping over the next 2 years to raise enough funds to be able to give the team full-time energy to be able to just really focus on completing that so that we can make it accessible. Because right now the 512 map is written in the jargon of a cultural engineer, cultural anthropologist, geek tracker named John Young. And it doesn't translate to modern vernacular very well. And you're much better off working with people like Deborah, who instead of spending the last 30 plus years of her life researching cultural tools and elements and putting together this massive circuit board, she's actually been applying it effectively in her community. So Deborah is going to co-lead with me so that she can actually work with you and actually use her consulting process that she's getting quite good at to help you figure out how to apply it and where to apply it and what to do. Because in some sense, having all 512 elements in your face anyway wouldn't help you. It would just make you feel overwhelmed. And going back to what Deborah just said, which is simply, where do I start? How can I start? How can I make a difference with what I've got right now? And as my dear friend Mark Tollefson, who also helps with village building, says, his father, a farmer from northern Alberta, used to say, start where you're at, work with what you got, do the best you can. And in essence, that's like the mantra for village building. So the 512 map, yes, it will be eventually available. Be patient. Help us raise the funds needed to get people working on it full time in a research and design capacity. Because not only do we have to get these things fully distinguished in vernacular that people can relate to, then we have to translate them into media that people can then watch and learn and listen from. So it's kind of like Julia Child for village building. We're going to have cooking shows. Here's recipe card number 1. Here's recipe card number 2. We're going to do that 512 times. And so far, we're really feeling good about how it's working. And short 20-minute sound bites with nice, podcasts and conversations with people who have actually used that and implemented it effectively, combined with, really awesome stories from ancient times when people were doing this as part of the unconscious, competent, unbroken lineage approach. And even the neurobiology of why it works, so that will all be, that's all part of village building. You'll have access to the first 64 of these cultural elements as part of village building for sure. And, in the meantime, be thinking about, hey, I'm a solo operator. I know I have to do this village building thing. I have to do this. I have to work alone. I'm going to do this. I'll figure out I'll talk to Garrett and he and I will work out a plan to make it work financially. But ultimately what I'm saying is, for the last couple of years, I've sort of made it a requirement that people come in with a triad if they want to do village building. And then I realized that, hey, wait a minute, sometimes people come in with a triad, one person stays, the other 2 leave once they realize it's not what they were looking for. And then that person ends up alone anyway. And the first village building project they do is identifying and helping to create a triad. So, that's what I did with you, Deborah, early on, right? And Phil Greenwood, who was also in the UK, who I think might have dropped off from internet issues. But Phil also was one of the early solo people in village building, and then you two came together and created the UK Bountiful Triad. So anything is possible. But our point is, don't think of this as something that you have to carry on your own back personally. And I'd love, Deborah, for you to speak to that history a little bit and just recommendations you can make to people who know they want to do this right now, don't have a triad, and but I want to get started, because you were one of those passionate people who knew you had to do this. And I said, okay, I know you're the right person, because we got to spend all that quality time in Findhorn together. But yeah, I wanted to speak to that a bit.
Sure. Yeah, so I joined as an individual, and I think someone from your team, John, I don't think it was you, I'm not sure, I can't remember, either you or Garrett or Matt sort of recognized that me and Phil were both on and were having the same kinds of conversations with you. I guess it was you, actually. We were both really passionate about doing something UK-wide and getting things going again. Plus, there was Peter on the Acorn Leadership program at the same time, and I think we were all kind of sparking in similar ways, but we didn't know each other super well. We'd maybe met at 1 or 2 events, but we were in the southeast of England, the southwest of England, and Scotland. So we all got together, and Peter at the same time was bringing together these gatherings in England, and I just knew I had to go down there and see those guys. So we spent a whole weekend together in, you know, horizontal rain in the middle of Wales somewhere with a bunch of other good folk that are 8 Shields or nature facilitators, and we just hashed these ideas around. We spoke to you, John, and the kind of the triad that it was about 4 of us, I think, at that point said we want to work on the development, the village builder side. And then another 3, although Peter overlapped on both, said, well, let's also get a camp going again next year. So let's have a real gathering of the tribe and all get together and do an art of mentoring. But then 4 of us will also work behind the scenes on the village building itself, on the development work itself. And we've carried on doing that. So, but we really didn't know each other well before that. We'd just met each other briefly, and now we're working super closely together, and it's absolutely great because we have different capacity at different times. You know, some of us have families, some of us have other businesses, some of us, you know, Peter's always teaching in different countries because he's a permaculturist, and I've been moving house and all sorts of things recently. Phil's got kids. So we've brought in other people, and it's growing and growing in layers. So we have our partners and families and friends and colleagues involved now, and it's a really vibrant network with a lot of capacity and a lot of support in it. And that's grown in 18 months from me really not knowing most of those people very well and not working closely with them. And now we have the mycelium, which, you know, the UK mycelium is really buzzing.
Yeah. I really love what's happening in the UK, you know, from the leadership and the commitment of all of the folks you mentioned and more. And then, you know, the beautiful work that Luby McNamara is doing in social permaculture, and her, you know, recently joining me to help, you know, people with one of the main design processes of village building called the renewal of creative path, which, you know, is something that everyone in village building needs to do, because it's really a self-analysis and a community analysis around what's working and what's not working in the connection world. And, you know, Luby's really great at helping to develop ways of implementing from ideal scening, you know, when you create an ideal scene from the renewal of creative path. And then I'm really excited about working with Luby on that. And just, you know, all the collaborations that are evolving in so many communities between all these great bodies of work, right? You know, from nonviolent communication to permaculture to, you know, transition, inner transition, you know, with Claire, and all the partnerships with all the wildlife organizations, environmental ed, and you know, social justice, and oh man, it just goes on and on and on. You know, and you could think about village building maybe as sort of a map for collaboration in some ways, right? A map for choreography, because I think village builders are more like in The Wizard of Oz, the man behind the green curtain. You know, it's not about getting credit for this. It's really about facilitating what wants to happen, right? You want to speak to that? I see that you got inspired by that.
Absolutely. Well, that's what's been happening recently. So you mentioned Claire from Inner Transition, and we're looking at how Transition and 8 Shields UK and internationally can work together. But also, what I've just talking to James and Madeline, for example, that were on the course with Luby last year, and he does community development work, and she does, she's a somatic psychotherapist, you know, body-based psychotherapist. And what we're really realizing, as you say, is it's a map where it's then like, who are the other organizations, who are the other individuals, who are the healers, who are the community development people, who are the people dealing with the difficult emotions, who are the people working with the children, who are the people working on communication skills, like you said, conscious communication, MVC, who's doing the subsistence farming, who's doing the regenerative design processes and sociocracy and holacracy, and there's all these different, and it all fits together. It's so there's no competition, there's no it's this model or other models, it's no this design tools or those design tools. What I found with everyone I've met is that they've gone, oh, this is kind of what I was doing, but it adds this bit, and oh, that bit was missing, and it's just it all kind of comes together in a lovely web. And so I'm so enjoying this sense of a growing group of associates with all these different complementary skills. And yeah, I don't think Village Builders it doesn't train us to be healers. It doesn't train us to be spiritual leaders. It kind of, we say, who are the people doing that in your community, and bring them in and work with them. And what are the processes that already exist that would be really great for doing that part, because it's important to have that part in a healthy village. So that's what I love. It honors all the gifts that are already there and all these wonderful things that have been emerging in the last 30, 40 years.
Fantastic. Yes, that's a great description, Deborah. I'm so glad that you're part of this because you're so much more on the ground than I am, the researcher and the madman behind the green curtain. You know, the thing that you stirred right there for me was, you know, the idea of kind of like almost like air traffic control. You know, like we sort of have more in common as village building with air traffic controllers than with, you know, teachers, if you will, right? We're sort of looking at the flow of energy that already exists and trying to help it land in the right way at the right time and move in a good flow so that everyone can move in a way that's healthy for them. So yeah, and yeah, as Deborah said, you know, she told you about an 18-month journey there in like 2 minutes. You know, and she's still here. You know, she's still a practicing village builder who's still learning, as I think we all will be. I mean, if I live to be 100 and I'm consciously, you know, awake and able to function until I'm 100, I will still be learning about village building because you won't master it, and it isn't like a list to complete. You know, there are awesome, helpful checklists of things to do and implement, and you know, good suggestions. And you know, with what we'll do with village builders is we'll basically have a monthly call where village builders from all the last several years of working together will come together to chew on some questions in a breakout conference session that works really well, you know, using the Maestro conference system. You know, there's a forum where everyone communicates and interacts and shares ideas and meet across village building networks so that, you know, people can share and learn and train and cross-train. You know, now village builders are going from one community to the other, helping each other, like Deborah's been talking about. There's a lot of cross-pollination, and this is the way it's scaling. You know, it's scaling because there's people out there doing it and then helping each other. And then there'll be a couple of mentoring calls with Deborah, and I'll be reviewing stuff with Deborah, and sometimes feel the need to jump in and roll up my sleeves and say, okay, look, I've seen this before. Hey, what about this? You know, but you know, I'm really trying to train village builder mentors so that it's not all on me, because it can't be. I've been really pulled in too many directions, and I really need this to scale. And it's not helpful for me to think that I can just do this by myself. I really need to pass the lineage down to as many as possible in the shortest possible timeline, and really empower and help people to become effective as a network, as a very distributed network, by the way, too. I mean, if you look at network diagrams, this is a classic distributed network where people are sharing social technologies, and you know, there's the power center is the earth itself and the future generations and the ancestors. It's not really you know, about any kind of top-down sort of model. It's really about, you know, collectively, unanimously creating quality assurance for one another and sharing best practices, because we figure out what works and what doesn't as friends, as a network of friends, and it's working really well in that way. And that has been the organic pattern since 1983 anyway. So we're just going with the flow of what wants to happen. So yeah. And I know, Matt, I'd love for you to chime in. And I know you've been getting a lot of questions. And what I'd love to tell people is that what we're going to do is digest your questions. And I'll be happy to, and probably Deborah too, to get on and probably not do a whole webinar about it, but probably a teleconference where we'll answer those questions in a, you know, sort of unlimited format so people can hear them. If there's too many questions, we'll break it up into multiple pieces and tell you what's in the you know, what questions we're answering, so you can go look for your question. But this is how this thing grows, because people are curious and they have their passions and they ask really great questions right at their edge of comfort and learning. And that's how this whole thing grows anyway. So if we don't get to all your questions, know that we're really excited that you're asking them. Whoops, and now maybe you're going to ask like 1,000 questions, and we'll have 1,000 teleconferences to deal with, Deborah, but I'm excited about that. So Matt, why don't you pull up your favorite question, the one that you feel is most relevant based on what you said, and we'll have the man behind the other green curtain, the white H Shields logo, ask the question into Deborah and my midst right now. So Matt, you got the mic.
Yeah, thanks, John and Deborah and everybody. There's been quite a few questions coming in, many of them sort of getting some answers in the chat as well. So a little bit of conversation going on there. And maybe a good question for right now is, Nancy asks, can you give some examples of what the, quote, village model looks like?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Nancy, thank you for your question. I'd like to go straight into that because it also is something that I promised at the beginning here, and we're going to go over a little bit past the hour here. But we started a little late. We were having some technical issues to get started here, but we're excited to share that answer. So an example of start where you're at, work with what you got, do the best you can. One simple story. A lot of people do nature connection programming for youth, and they have the children, for several hours, say every Tuesday or whatever, out in nature, and then the children go home. Well, now the children have been tweaked in a positive way. Their neurobiology has been activated in a positive way. And when they go home, their instincts are that their parents are going to meet them in a certain way and take what happened during the day and bring it to the next level. But the parents are completely unaware that that's going on. By the way, as are the children. They just know that they have a longing for a certain kind of facilitation on the part of the adults that they call their family, right? And this is just instinctive. It's below consciousness. And so one of the village building strategies we would put into an example like that would be to develop a parent training model to work with side by side with the children's program model. And every single time that's been implemented, it has totally improved the power of the work for the children. It's made the instructors much happier who are actually facilitating nature connection for children. And the parents, their light bulb goes on, and all of a sudden they're interested in nature connection. And now the parents are doing stuff with the children in nature. So that's an example of, problem solving on the village level. It isn't really about the kids program, Another example, Deborah, why don't you pull one out from the adult world, something that you did, like you already used that one example of applying gratitude in your meetings at the organization you were managing for a while there. What's another example that works among adults in a modern setting? One simple village building strategy.
I feel like talking about peacemaking, just because that's what we've been talking about a lot the last few days here in Findhorn. So one of the things that I found very, very powerful, and I talked with John at Schumacher College last year on, and I'm now having conversations locally with the Eco Village and the wider community here about is peacemaking. So really just what happens between us as individuals, all the interpersonal layers. Everyone carries wounds, past histories, family trauma, cultural trauma, and we bump into it all the time. Different communication styles, different leadership styles, different preferences, different sensitivities. And what has been completely transformative for me in the communities I've been living and working with is normalizing that, knowing that happens, knowing that that's part of being human. And then once we know that that's going to happen, we just design for it. We're like, we know we're going to bump into each other. We know we're going to get hurt feelings or hurt each other or be angry with each other. So there's no shame in that. We're human. We're vulnerable. What do we do when it happens so that we can process it in a good way, so that we can grow and learn from it, so we can build trust and relationship, and so we can actually be more creative and innovative, because when we work together through our difficulties, we actually see more and we become more as a group. So using all the design principles from peacemaking, which is part of the village building set of processes and so on, means that in any organizational group or friendship or relationship I've been in, we have these design principles for dealing with that. And so that goes at any layers between adults. It can be from a board of trustees to a staff, or from volunteers to staff, or between colleagues, or between people in different community groups trying to collaborate on something like a transition town initiative or a community garden. So I think that's one of the most powerful things I've seen. And it's often missing even from really progressive projects. You might have a conflict resolution procedure. That's very different than designing a culture for peace. Designing, right.
Yeah, that's exactly right on. I mean, one of the things that, there's a podcast that Matt and I will make sure we send a link to when we send you the recording, but it's, a professor from Austria, she was asking me, she was teaching communication to college students, and she said, could you give me something on peacemaking that I could, give to these college students? So we basically created a little podcast called, effective connection, the importance of supportive connective containers, and ultimately what peacemaking is a container for conversation that's supportive of everyone's needs, and really anticipating, as Deborah said, that there's trauma history in the room. If two human beings end up in the room together, there's trauma history in the room. And that's going to rear its head at some point, so you're doing, what I like to, instead of calling it conflict resolution, but by the way, peacemaking also addresses that, but there's plenty of great models for addressing conflict resolution. We're really thinking about it in terms of conflict prevention, in essence, or celebrating conflict as a dynamic, creative opportunity, and shifting that perspective. So we'll make sure we send that link to the importance of supportive connective containers, and that'll be a fun listen for you. I did record it really early in the morning, and I sound a little incoherent, but it's still good information. So we'll include that when we send the PDF of supportive community structures that also references peacemaking. And Yngwie was a great peacemaker from day one. All traditional indigenous lineages practice a form of peacemaking. And they're really basically all kind of following the same essential protocol. Make sure people feel seen, welcomed, invited, that they're really present and ready. And if they're not, find out why and address that first to make sure they can fully show up before addressing any agenda items. That would be sort of the essence of it. And then coming to unanimous consent and, letting the elders really weigh in. And at the end of the meeting to really review the points of unity, and then releasing the container, because it's almost like stepping into a ceremony, a conversation thought of as a ritual, where you go into it intentionally. You learn to work from your quiet place within, that nature connection part of yourself. You offer your words from that place. You listen to each other from that place. You reach unity from that place, and then you consciously disband the conversation from that place. So there's an opening and a closing. And this is, what you would just call protocol. When indigenous people come together, they follow it very carefully and very instinctively. It's just part of the human nervous system. It's part of the needs of a human nervous system. And it's one of the connection elements. Actually, the peacemaking model is more than one of the 512. It's, multiple pieces of it, but it's very much an important social fabric piece that is foundational for building connective work in communities. So thanks for bringing that one, Deborah. That was the right one to bring. Hey, from here, I just want to kind of review again for you what we're doing. Thanks for hanging in if you followed us this far. Village Builders will include that monthly call, access to a forum and a network of other Village Builders leaders, all kinds of toolkits, and enrollment in very specific layer trainings. We have art of mentoring leadership that we train in. We have what we call fire tenders, which is peacemaking, that we train in, some basic nature connection tools that we train in. So we offer, so many access opportunities for people that you can choose from your community who are stakeholders to be trained in these various levels. So you're creating specialties. And these are, some of them are other group call mentoring initiatives. Some of them are just toolkits, that is material for you to work through. We have a responder who reads your email responses from the questions that are asked in the toolkits themselves. And so there's a nice dialogue. There's lots of stuff going on. And then again, you get some consulting calls with Deborah. And and when I'm really needed, I'll step in as well. And Deborah, of course, and I will be meeting regularly to discuss what's happening and where she feels she might need my input. So, and then you get the support of Matt, and Garrett is the person who will set up a discovery session with you and have conversations and try to help you work out a plan that works for you. And Garrett's really knowledgeable about the whole system. And then we have awesome staff around the world who are helping the various layer trainings that you'll have access to, as well as the village building model for one or all three of you in your triad, if we can find a way to fit you in, for a weekly conversation with village builders from all over the world that's just happening continuously, where this cross-pollination and cross-training and cross-inspiration is happening. So that's what's in it, and I think you'll find it to be incredibly valuable and very powerful and really helpful. And any last thoughts from you, Deborah, because we don't want to keep people too long here.
Just to take your time with the materials. I just saw what was on the platform that was being offered this year, and there's a lot, but we're going to be here to help you navigate through it and figure out which bits you're really excited about first, whether you're super excited about doing nature connection in your community first, or peacemaking, or there's a lot of different layers, a lot of different toolkits. And you can really follow your excitement, your passion, and just start with that. There's no order that you have to do it in particularly.
Right.
And if you've got more, ideally, if you have a triad or a few people in your region that start getting involved, they'll be excited about different parts to you, and it'll just be lovely because you'll be able to share out all the different processes, tools, and activities to do with local people.
Brilliant, Deborah. Brilliant. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, one of the things that you'll be able to see is a little short, video slideshow where we speak to, how to think about village building and where to start, because you'll need that. So there's going to be great orientation materials there for you. And and then you'll get a map of, what's in Village Builders. And, as Deborah said, in her early interview with you, she's going to find out where you want to start, and help you get slotted into the right training space, and know what toolkits to work with and where to begin. So yeah, and be ready to be inspired and feel hopeful to be connected to a bunch of great people all over the world who are just as hapless and wild as Deborah and I, trying to make a difference in a world that is really, really challenging at times, that makes it hard sometimes to get up in the morning and feel good. But you will feel good from village building. I know that. I love the Village Builders. I'm so happy that they're out there doing what they're doing, and I'm super grateful to them and to the way that they're helping both the adults and especially the children whose little hands are reaching up, because I know we can't do it without you. So we'll be here for you if you want to join us now or in the future. But yeah, please stay in touch. And again, Matt, thank you. Again, next steps behind the scenes, you'll receive an email with a link to this webinar and a link to the things that we promised, that you can, find some things that you can put into action right away. So any farewell words, closing gratitudes, Deborah, as we close this connective container?
I'm just really grateful to have been here. I've been grinning all the way through. It's so exciting to feel you all out there and to think about all the projects that may spark from this initial conversation. I love this feeling of the ripples going out. Yeah, so my heart feels very full, and I'm very grateful to have been here. And I hope to meet many of you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Deborah. Hey, Matt, any last words from the 8 Shields Mystery Man?
Yeah, thanks, John. And I just want to acknowledge there's been quite a few additional questions coming in, people networking in the chat. And I believe we have tentatively scheduled a teleseminar that is just a call-in thing next week to answer. As John mentioned, we'll try to answer some of these questions there. And the other thing I just love to hear from people in the spirit of tiny steps, if you will, is what it is that you could do yourself to add a little bit of connection density, just like the smallest little bit. And that what sort of habit or routine could you set up in your own life and relationships to add just a little bit of connection density? And we'd love to hear from you. You can send us an email, ask@8shields.org, and we may not be able to respond to all of them directly, but I'll be compiling those and sharing those with John, as well as everything that came up in the chat here. Thanks.
Matt, thank you. I love Matt's thinking, don't you, Deborah? He's always thinking. Yeah, thank you, Matt. That's super helpful. Matt is like mycelium fertilizer that helps the mycelium grow. And, for me, I feel full also, as Deborah said, and, even feeling tears come up a little bit now. So for my gratitude for the opportunity to help in whatever way that I can and whatever way 8 Shields can. We just really, really want to help. And thank you all for all that you're doing. And don't give up hope. We need you. With that, we'll end. And all the best, everyone.
Good night. Or good morning.
Good morning.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.